They dragged her through the dirt like livestock, calling her cursed, calling her barren, calling her unworthy of the name woman. But when widow Mara Ellington's knees hit the dust of Ironwood's main street, two tiny voices shattered the silence. "We'll ask Daddy to marry you." The crowd froze. The Reverend paled, and the quiet rancher who'd lost everything stepped forward to claim the one thing the town had thrown away. This is the story of how broken souls rebuild and how love grows where cruelty once reigned. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The sun rose over Ironwood like a blade, sharp, merciless, cutting through the morning fog with the kind of heat that made men mean and women meaner. It was the sort of day that baked the earth until it cracked, the sort of day where dust hung in the air like judgment itself, waiting to settle on whoever the town decided deserved it most. Today, that person was Mara Ellington. She stood in the center of Main Street, wrists bound with rough hemp that had already drawn blood, her dark hair matted against her face, her dress, once modest, once clean, torn at the shoulder and stained with the red clay that seemed to seep into everything in this godforsaken corner of Montana territory. Her knees shook, but she would not fall. Not yet. Not while they were watching, and they were all watching. The entire town of Ironwood had gathered, as they always did when Reverend Huxley called for a reckoning. Men leaned against porch rails with arms crossed, mouths set in grim lines of approval. Women clutched their shawls and whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes gleaming with something that looked less like righteousness and more like relief. Relief that today, it wasn't them in the dirt. Children peeked between their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and confused, sensing the cruelty, but not yet understanding it. Give them time. Ironwood had a way of teaching its children exactly what it valued, and what it didn't. Mara's breathing came shallow and quick, each inhale tasting of copper and dust. Her ribs ached where Dalton Pruitt had shoved her off his porch an hour earlier, sending her sprawling into the street. He'd stood over her, red-faced and righteous, bellowing about the sanctity of decent folk and the shame she brought to his late brother's name. His brother. Her husband. Samuel Ellington had been dead for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that Mara needed to count. The absence of him was carved into her bones, a hollow ache that never quite faded. He'd been a good man, a kind man, even if Ironwood never saw it that way, even if they'd called him weak for marrying a woman like her. A woman too big, too plain, too quiet, too barren. That last word was the one that stuck, the one they wielded like a weapon. Barren. As if a woman's worth could be measured solely in her ability to produce children, as if her body were nothing more than soil to be tilled and planted, judged fertile or fallow by men who wouldn't know tenderness if it bit them. Samuel had never made her feel that way. He'd never once looked at her with disappointment when month after month, year after year, no child came. He'd held her through the tears, told her she was enough, told her they were enough. But Samuel was gone. And without him, Mara was nothing but a burden, a childless widow with no family, no fortune, and no future. At least that's what Ironwood had decided. "She's a curse!" someone shouted from the crowd. Mara couldn't see who. The faces blurred together, a sea of hard eyes and harder hearts. Took 3 good men with her. First her father, then her husband, now her brother-in-law's luck's turned sour. All 'cause of her. That wasn't true. Her father had died of consumption when she was 12. Samuel had been kicked by a horse. A horrible accident, nothing more. And Dalton Pruitt's sour luck was his own doing, the result of gambling debts and poor choices. But facts didn't matter in Ironwood. Only stories did. And the story they'd written for Mara Ellington was one of shame. Reverend Huxley stepped forward, his black coat somehow immaculate despite the dust swirling around him. He was a tall man, narrow as a rail, with a face like a hatchet, and eyes that never quite looked at you. They looked through you, searching for sin, for weakness, for any crack in your armor they could exploit from the pulpit. "Mara Ellington," he intoned, his voice carrying across the silent street with the practiced ease of a man who loved the sound of his own condemnation. "You stand before this community accused of bringing misfortune upon good Christian people. Your presence is a stain upon the moral fabric of Ironwood." Mara's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to rage against the injustice of it all. But she'd learned long ago that silence was her only shield. Anything she said would be twisted, used against her. Better to endure. Better to survive. "You have taken from this town," Huxley continued, pacing now, his boots clicking against the hard-packed earth. "Taken time, taken resources, taken the good name of a decent man and dragged it through scandal with your inadequacies." Inadequacies. The word hit like a fist. The Bible tells us that a woman's highest calling is motherhood, that she is to be a helpmeet to her husband, a nurturer of life. "You have failed in this calling. You have proven yourself unworthy of the title of wife, of woman. That's enough." The voice cut through Huxley's sermon like a knife through silk. Every head turned. At the far end of Main Street, a man stood in the shadow of the livery stable. He was tall, taller than most, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world and a face weathered by sun and sorrow. His hat was pulled low, but Mara could see his eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter frost. Coulter Rowan, the rancher from the North Valley, the man who'd lost his wife to childbirth 3 years past, leaving him with twin daughters and a heart so shattered he'd barely spoken to anyone since. Mara had seen him in town maybe half a dozen times, always silent, always watchful, always gone before anyone could press him into conversation. What was he doing here? Huxley's expression soured. "Mr. Rowan, this is a matter of community justice. It does not concern you." "Looks like it concerns the whole damn town," Coulter said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. He started walking, each step deliberate, closing the distance between himself and the crowd. "Seeing as you dragged every soul out here to watch. This woman has a name." Huxley's mouth thinned. "Mrs. Ellington has brought disgrace. To who? You?" Coulter stopped a few feet from Mara, his gaze sweeping over her bound wrists, the blood, the dirt, the way she trembled despite her best efforts to stay still. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or recognition. The look of one broken thing seeing another. "She is a burden to this community," Huxley insisted, his voice rising. "Without husband or child, without means to support herself, she takes charity meant for the deserving." Deserving. Coulter's jaw worked, like he was chewing on the word and finding it bitter. "That's what you call yourselves? We are God-fearing people. You're cowards." The crowd erupted. Shouts of outrage, gasps of shock, a few nervous laughs from men who didn't quite know what to make of Coulter Rowan suddenly finding his voice after years of silence. Huxley drew himself up, righteous fury radiating from every line of his thin frame. "You will not speak to me, to us, in such a manner. This is a matter of morality, of kicking someone while they're down because it makes you feel big." Coulter's tone was flat, factual, and somehow that made it cut deeper. "That's all this is. That's all it's ever been." Mara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Why was he defending her? They weren't friends. They'd never even spoken. She was nobody to him, just another lost soul in a town full of them. "Mr. Rowan," Huxley said, his voice dropping to something silky and dangerous, "I understand you have suffered your own tragedies, but that does not give you the right to interfere." "Daddy!" Two small figures broke from the crowd, darting between the legs of stunned adults, their matching braids flying behind them like pale gold ribbons. They couldn't have been more than 4 years old, identical in every way except for the stubborn set of their jaws, one slightly more pronounced than the other. June and Lily Rowan. They skidded to a stop in front of Mara, their little bodies forming a barrier between her and the crowd, their faces set with a determination that would have been comical if it weren't so heartbreaking. "Leave her alone." The first twin, June, Mara thought, recognizing the small scar on her chin from a fall last summer, shouted, her voice high and fierce. "She's nice," Lily added, her hands balled into tiny fists. "She gave us apples when we were hungry." That had been months ago. Mara had seen the girls wandering behind the general store, thin and quiet, while their father loaded supplies. She'd given them 2 apples from her own meager basket, nothing more. She hadn't thought they'd remember. But children remembered kindness, especially children who didn't see much of it. "Girls," Coulter said, his voice gentling in a way Mara wouldn't have thought possible. Get back. We'll ask you to marry her, June announced, spinning to face her father with absolute conviction. Then she can come home with us. The crowd went silent. Even Huxley seemed momentarily struck dumb. Lily nodded vigorously, her braids bouncing. She can be our mama, and then nobody can be mean to her anymore, 'cause she'll be ours. Mara's breath caught. She looked at Coulter, expecting anger, expecting him to grab his daughters and walk away, to leave her to whatever fate Ironwood had planned. Instead, she saw something she couldn't name, a softness behind the hard edges, a question in those winter blue eyes. And then he moved. 3 strides brought him to Mara's side. He pulled a knife from his belt, a working blade, worn smooth from use, and with 2 quick cuts, sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. She gasped as the pressure released, blood rushing back into her hands in a flood of pins and needles. She stumbled, her legs giving out after an hour of standing, of enduring. Coulter caught her. His hands were rough, calloused from years of ranch work, but steady. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, and held her against his chest like she was something precious, something worth protecting. She's coming with me, he said. Not a question. A statement. Huxley found his voice. You cannot simply... I can. Coulter's gaze swept the crowd, cold and unyielding. Anyone here got a problem with me taking a wife? Silence. Thick and suffocating. Thought not. He looked down at his daughters, who were clinging to his legs, their faces bright with triumph. June, Lily, home. They took off running, whooping with joy, their laughter cutting through the tension like bells. Coulter carried Mara toward his wagon, still parked near the livery. She wanted to say something. Thank you. Why? What are you doing? But her throat had closed up, choked with too many emotions to name. Behind them, the crowd began to murmur, voices rising in confusion and speculation. Huxley was shouting something about propriety, about the law, about God's will. But Coulter didn't stop, didn't look back. He set Mara gently in the wagon bed, where blankets were already piled. He'd come prepared for hauling supplies, not rescuing a widow, and climbed up onto the driver's seat. The twins scrambled up beside him, still giggling, still radiating the pure, uncomplicated joy of children who believed they'd just saved someone. Maybe they had. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching over the dry earth. Mara sat in the back, her wrists still bleeding, her dress still torn, watching Ironwood shrink behind them. And for the first time in 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days, she let herself cry. The ride to the Rowan Ranch took the better part of an hour, following a rutted path that wound through golden grassland and stands of pine, climbing gradually into the foothills where the air thinned and the sky stretched vast and impossibly blue. Mara didn't speak, neither did Coulter. Only the twins chattered, their voices bright and relentless, asking questions, making plans, constructing an entire future in which Mara lived with them and made pies and sang songs and tucked them in at night. She should tell them it wasn't real, should explain that whatever their father had done back in Ironwood, however gallant, however unexpected, didn't mean anything permanent. He'd taken her out of pity, out of some fleeting sense of decency. Once they reached the ranch, he'd probably give her a few days to recover, maybe help her figure out where to go next. But the twins' enthusiasm was infectious, their hope so pure it hurt to hear. So Mara stayed silent and let them dream. The ranch appeared gradually, rising from the landscape like something out of a storybook. A sturdy house built of logs and stone, smoke curling from the chimney. A barn freshly painted red, corrals stretching out in neat lines, horses grazing in the distance, fields of wheat swaying in the breeze, golden and ready for harvest. It was beautiful. More than that, it was alive, cared for, loved. Coulter brought the wagon to a stop near the porch, setting the brake with a practiced motion. He climbed down, then turned and held out a hand to Mara. She hesitated, staring at his calloused palm, at the silent offer it represented. "You'll need help," he said quietly. "You're hurt." She was. Her wrists still bled sluggishly, her ribs ached, her knees were scraped raw from where she'd hit the ground. Everything hurt. She'd been hurting for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like not to. She took his hand. His grip was firm, careful. He helped her down from the wagon, his other hand hovering near her elbow in case she stumbled. She didn't. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. Some last shred of dignity she refused to surrender. The twins had already disappeared into the house, their voices echoing from inside, excited and high-pitched. Coulter glanced at the door, then back at Mara. They'll want to show you everything. Fair warning. They don't stop talking. I don't mind, Mara said. Her voice came out hoarse, rough from disuse and unshed tears. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded and gestured toward the house. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. Inside the house was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something sweeter, cinnamon, maybe, or dried apples. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a long table surrounded by mismatched chairs, shelves lined with books and jars and small treasures. It was tidy, but lived in, the sort of place where people actually existed rather than just displayed their lives. June and Lily were already pulling Mara toward a door on the far side of the room. This is the washing room, June announced. Papa built it special so we don't have to use the creek in winter. Coulter intercepted them gently, his hands on their shoulders. Girls, give her some space. She needs to breathe. They deflated slightly but didn't argue. Can we help? Lily asked, her voice small and hopeful. You can get her clean clothes, Coulter said. Something of your mother's from the trunk in my room. Their faces lit up again, and they dashed off, feet thundering on the wooden floor. Coulter turned to Mara. There's a basin through there, fresh water in the pitcher, bandages in the cabinet. Take your time. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before Mara could stop it. He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost too quiet to hear, because someone should have done it a long time ago. Then he walked away, leaving Mara alone in the doorway, staring after him, her heart doing something strange and complicated in her chest. The washing room was small but functional, with a large basin, a cracked mirror, and shelves stocked with soap and towels, and the kinds of small necessities that turned a house into a home. Mara filled the basin with water from the pitcher, then carefully began unwinding the makeshift bandages someone, probably Coulter, had wrapped around her wrists during the ride. The rope burns were ugly, raw and red, but not as deep as she'd feared. She cleaned them methodically, biting her lip against the sting, then wrapped them in fresh strips of cloth from the cabinet. Her reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, hollow-eyed, gaunt, bruised. When had she become this person? When had she started looking like someone who expected cruelty, who flinched before the blow even landed? A soft knock at the door made her jump. Miss Mara? Lily's voice, tentative and sweet. We brought you clothes. Mara opened the door to find both twins standing there, holding a folded dress between them like an offering. It was simple, dark blue cotton, practical and sturdy, but clean and whole, which was more than Mara could say for her own torn garment. Thank you, she whispered. June beamed. Mama was tall like you. Papa says you might fit. Mama. The woman who died bringing these girls into the world. The ghost that surely still haunted this house. I'll be careful with it, Mara promised. It's yours now, Lily said matter-of-factly. Then both girls scampered off again, leaving Mara holding the dress and fighting back another wave of tears. She changed quickly, the fabric soft against her battered skin. The dress fit reasonably well, a little loose in the waist, a little tight in the shoulders, but it was clean and whole in hers, at least for now. When she emerged, she found the twins waiting at the table, practically vibrating with excitement. Coulter was at the stove, his back to her, stirring something in a large pot. Sit, he said without turning around. Food'll be ready soon. Mara sat. The twins immediately scooted their chairs closer, flanking her like tiny guards. Do you know any stories? June asked. Can you sing? Lily added. Do you like animals? We have chickens and horses and a goat named Butter. Butter's mean, but she makes good milk. Papa says we're not allowed to ride the horses alone yet, but maybe you could take us? And we have a cat, but she's wild and won't come inside, but sometimes we leave her fish. The questions came rapid fire, overlapping, overwhelming in the best possible way. Mara found herself answering, smiling, engaging with these two small beings who seemed determined to fill every silence with sound. Coulter set bowls in front of them, stew, thick with vegetables and meat, steam rising in fragrant clouds. He took the seat across from Mara, his own bowl in hand, and for a moment they just ate in companionable quiet. It was the first real meal Mara had eaten in weeks, maybe months. She'd been living on scraps in Ironwood, too proud to beg, too poor to buy, making do with whatever she could forage or trade for. This, hot food, clean clothes, safety, felt like a dream she'd wake from any moment. "You worked at the boarding house," Coulter said eventually, his tone conversational. Mara nodded, swallowing her mouthful. "For a while, after Samuel died. Mrs. Chen let me clean rooms in exchange for a place to sleep. She speak kindly of you." That surprised Mara. Mrs. Chen had been one of the few people in Ironwood who treated her like a human being, but Mara hadn't realized the older woman had spoken to anyone about her. "She's a good woman," Mara said quietly. "Said you worked harder than anyone she'd ever hired. Said you had a way with herbs, too. Fixed her rheumatism when nothing else would." Mara felt heat creep into her cheeks. "It was just a poultice. My mother taught me." "And your mother taught you to cook?" "Some. And to sew, and tend animals, and keep a house." She paused, then added, "I'm not useless. Whatever Ironwood thinks." Coulter's gaze sharpened, something fierce flickering behind the ice blue. "I don't give a damn what Ironwood thinks." The words landed between them like a promise. Morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Mara woke to the sound of roosters and the twins' laughter drifting through her door, bright and clear as bells. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the wagon ride, the rescue, the impossible kindness of a stranger. Then her wrists throbbed beneath their bandages, and memory crashed back like a wave. She sat up slowly, testing her body's various aches and pains. Everything hurt, but it was the dull hurt of healing rather than the sharp hurt of fresh wounds. Progress, she supposed. The dress from yesterday was folded neatly on the small chair. She'd rinsed it as best she could last night, scrubbing away the blood and dirt until the water ran clear. It was still damp, so she pulled on the blue cotton dress again, finger-combing her hair into something resembling order. When she emerged into the kitchen, she found Coulter at the stove again, flipping flapjacks with practiced efficiency. The twins sat at the table, already dressed for the day, their faces sticky with what looked like honey. "You're awake," June announced unnecessarily. "Papa made extra," Lily added, pointing at a stack of flapjacks that could have fed a small army. Coulter glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable in the early morning light. "Coffee's on the table. Help yourself." Mara did, pouring herself a cup from the battered tin pot, wrapping her hands around the warmth. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but after years of doing without, it tasted like heaven. "Girls," Coulter said, sliding flapjacks onto their plates, "eat up. We've got work today." "Can Miss Mara help?" June asked immediately. "She's recovering." "I can help," Mara said. The words came out firmer than she'd intended. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. She straightened her spine, meeting Coulter's gaze. "I'm not an invalid, and I won't sit idle while you feed and house me." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or approval. "You sure? Those wrists? Will heal faster if I keep moving." That wasn't entirely true, but she couldn't bear the thought of sitting in this house all day while they worked around her. She'd spent too many months in Ironwood being treated like a burden, like dead weight. She wouldn't do it here, too. Coulter studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you take it slow. And if something hurts, you stop." "I will." "She won't," Lily whispered to her sister, not quietly enough. June giggled. "Papa doesn't either." A ghost of a smile crossed Coulter's face, there and gone so fast Mara almost missed it. He set a plate in front of her, 3 flapjacks, butter melting golden across them, and returned to the stove without another word. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the twins' occasional chatter about the day's plans. Apparently there were chickens to feed, eggs to collect, a garden that needed weeding, and something mysterious called the Fence Project that made both girls groan dramatically. After breakfast, the real work began. Mara followed Coulter and the twins out into the bright morning, squinting against the sun, taking in the full scope of the ranch for the first time. The house sat at the center of it all, surrounded by outbuildings in various states of repair. The barn was solid and well-maintained, the chicken coop needed new wire, and there was what looked like a half-finished addition to the main house, lumber stacked neatly beside it. "Gardens through here," Coulter said, leading her around the side of the house. "It's gotten away from me this season. Too much to do, not enough hours." That was an understatement. The garden was a tangle of weeds and neglected plants, tomatoes sprawling unpruned, squash vines choking out the beans. But underneath the chaos, Mara could see the bones of something good. Rich soil, sturdy stakes, evidence of someone who'd once cared deeply about this plot of earth. "I can work on this," she said. Coulter hesitated. "Your wrists. I'll be careful." She knelt, running her fingers through the soil, feeling its texture. Good dark earth, well composted. "You've got bindweed coming in from the east side. And that's blight on your tomatoes. If we don't cut it back, you'll lose the whole crop." He crouched beside her, examining the plants with new attention. "How can you tell?" "See the browning on the leaves and the way the stems are splitting? My mother taught me." She glanced at him, found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I know plants, growing them, healing with them. It's one of the few things I'm actually good at." "I doubt that's true." The words were quiet, but they hit like a thunderclap. Mara's breath caught. Before she could respond, the twins came running over, arguing about whose turn it was to scatter chicken feed. "Both of you," Coulter said, straightening. "June, you handle the feed. Lily, check for eggs. And be gentle. Henny's gone broody again." They scattered, still bickering but good-naturedly. Coulter turned back to Mara. "You really want to spend your morning pulling weeds?" "I really do." He nodded slowly. "Tools are in the shed. Take what you need. And Mara?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Thank you." For what? She wanted to ask. For not being a burden? For making herself useful? But he was already walking away, his long strides carrying him toward the barn, and the moment passed. Mara found the tool shed easily enough, a small structure leaning slightly to one side, packed with everything from shovels to seed packets to mysterious metal objects she couldn't name. She selected a hand trowel, a pair of shears that needed sharpening, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. Then she went to work. The first hour was hard. Her wrists protested every motion, her muscles screaming from yesterday's abuse. But Mara pushed through it, falling into the rhythm of the work, letting her hands remember what her mind tried to forget. Pull the weeds, careful of the roots. Cut back the blighted stems. Stake the tomatoes. Prune the squash. The sun climbed higher. Sweat dripped down her back, soaked through the blue dress. She didn't care. This was honest work, productive work, the kind that left you exhausted but satisfied at the end of the day. Around mid-morning, Lily appeared with a cup of water, her face serious. "Papa says you have to drink. It's hot." Mara accepted the cup gratefully, draining it in 3 long swallows. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lily beamed at the endearment, then plopped down in the dirt beside her. "What are you doing?" "Saving your tomatoes." "Why do they need saving?" So Mara explained about blight and how diseases spread through plants, about companion planting and crop rotation, about the way certain herbs could protect against pests. Lily listened with the intense focus only children possess, asking questions that ranged from insightful to bizarre. "Can plants get tummy aches?" "In a way, yes." "What's their favorite food?" "Depends on the plant. Tomatoes like... Is dirt alive?" Mara laughed, surprising herself. "Very much so. It's full of tiny creatures we can't see, all working together to make things grow." "That's magic." "That's science. But it feels like magic sometimes." June joined them eventually, covered in chicken feathers and indignation. "Henny pecked me, right on the hand." "Let me see," Mara said, setting down her trowel. The girl held out her hand. Sure enough, there was a small red mark where the broody hen had made her displeasure known. "She's just protecting her eggs. Can't blame her for that." "I can," June muttered darkly. Mara smiled, then looked around. "Is there any lavender growing nearby?" Both girls shook their heads. "What about comfrey? Plantain?" "There's some weeds by the water pump," Lily offered. "Show me." They led her to the pump, where sure enough a patch of broadleaf plantain grew in the damp earth. Mara picked several leaves, crushing them between her palms until they released their juice, then pressed them gently against June's hand. There. That'll help with the sting. June's eyes went wide. It feels cool. It's a healer plant. Good for cuts and stings and all sorts of hurts. You're like a witch, Lily breathed, awed. Mara stiffened. That word, witch, had been thrown at her in Ironwood more than once, always with venom, always with threat. But Lily's face held only admiration, wonder, the pure acceptance of a child who hadn't yet learned to be cruel. Not a witch, Mara said softly, just someone who pays attention to the world. The girls peppered her with more questions as they walked back to the garden, and Mara found herself answering, teaching, sharing knowledge she'd thought would die with her. It felt good. More than good. It felt necessary, like some part of her that had been locked away was finally breathing again. By noon, Coulter called them in for lunch. Cold meat and bread and butter, eaten standing up while they discussed the afternoon's work. He'd been mending fences in the north pasture, he said, and needed to finish before the cattle wandered into the neighbor's property. Again, he added with a grimace. Mr. Hendricks still giving you trouble? Mara asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. It wasn't her business. She wasn't really part of this family, no matter what the twins seemed to think. But Coulter didn't seem offended. He thinks I've got it too good. Big ranch, good land, water rights. Likes to remind me how lucky I am. Are you? The question escaped before Mara could stop it. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw past the walls he'd built, saw the grief and exhaustion and bone-deep loneliness that mirrored her own. Some days, he said finally. The twins spent the afternoon helping Coulter with the fence. Mostly they ran ahead checking for loose posts while he did the actual repairs. Mara stayed with the garden, working until her hands were filthy and her back ached and the sun began its slow descent toward the western peaks. She'd made real progress. Half the garden was cleared, the tomatoes pruned and staked properly, the squash vines redirected. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Much better. As she stood surveying her work, she heard footsteps behind her. Coulter approached, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat, his face shadowed beneath his hat. You've been busy, he said. So have you. I had help. He gestured toward the house, where the twins were visible through the window, apparently setting the table for supper. They wouldn't stop talking about the magic leaves you used on June's hand. Mara felt heat creep into her cheeks. It's not magic. Just plantain, common as dirt. To you, maybe. To them, you hung the moon. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. To be honest, I haven't seen them this happy since, well, in a long time. They're good girls. Sweet. They are. But they've been through hell, losing their mother, then watching me barely hold it together for 3 years. His jaw tightened. They needed someone. I just couldn't figure out how to be enough. You're their father. You're more than enough. Am I? The question was raw, vulnerable in a way that made Mara's chest ache. I keep them fed and clothed and safe, but that's survival, not living. They need more. Someone who knows how to make a house feel like a home again. Coulter, I'm not asking anything, he said quickly. I just want you to know that whatever happens, however long you stay, you've already given them something I couldn't, and I'm grateful. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Mara standing in the garden with dirt under her nails and tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The days began to blur together, each one following a similar rhythm. Wake before dawn, help with breakfast, work until sunset, fall into bed exhausted. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from purpose rather than despair. Mara finished reclaiming the garden, then moved on to other projects. She organized the root cellar, which had become a chaotic jumble of half-empty jars and forgotten vegetables. She mended the chicken coop wire, earning grudging respect from Henny, the broody hen. She even tackled the massive pile of mending that had accumulated in a basket by the fireplace. Shirts with missing buttons, dresses with torn hems, socks worn through at the heel. The twins followed her everywhere, chattering constantly, helping in the way children help, which is to say, making twice the work but 3 times the joy. They taught her the names of all the animals, showed her their secret hideout in the hayloft, begged for stories at bedtime. And Mara, who'd thought she'd never have children, who'd been told she was barren and broken and worthless, found herself falling in love with these 2 fierce little souls. Coulter watched from a distance, always working, always busy, but present in a way that mattered. He fixed the hinges on her door without being asked, left extra blankets folded outside her room when the nights turned cold, complimented her cooking in his quiet way, a simple good or thank you that somehow meant more than elaborate praise. They didn't talk about what happened in Ironwood. They didn't talk about the future. They existed in this strange liminal space, not quite a family, but not quite strangers either. 3 weeks into her stay, disaster struck. It started with the cattle. Coulter came in from the north pasture looking grim, his mouth set in a hard line. Something's wrong with the herd. How wrong, Vice? Mara asked, immediately alert. 3 cows down, can't stand, eyes rolling back, the rest are acting spooked. Mara's mind raced. Any signs of bloat, foaming at the mouth? He shook his head. No foam, but they're shaking, and there's what? Blood in their stool. Mara's stomach dropped. She'd seen something like this before, years ago, on a neighboring farm. It had wiped out half their livestock before anyone figured out what was wrong. Show me. They rode out together, the twins left behind with strict instructions to stay in the house. The sick cows were a heartbreaking sight. 3 beautiful Herefords, once strong and healthy, now lying in the grass trembling and dying. Mara dismounted, approaching carefully, studying the animals with practiced eyes. She checked their gums, their breathing, the way their muscles twitched beneath their hides. When did you last move them to new pasture? She asked. 2 days ago. Why? Because I think they've been poisoned. Coulter's face went pale. Poisoned? How? Not intentionally. See that stand of trees over there? She pointed to a cluster of oaks at the pasture's edge. Those are red oaks, and after a hard rain, their leaves and acorns can produce tannic acid in quantities high enough to poison cattle. We had that storm last week. Exactly. The cattle probably browsed on the fresh shoots, maybe ate some acorns. It built up in their systems, and now, she gestured at the dying animals. Can we save them? Mara wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise him she could fix this, could undo the damage. But she'd seen how this ended. The 3 that are down? Probably not. But the rest of the herd, if we move them now, keep them away from the oaks, we might be able to prevent more losses. How do you know all this? My mother's people were farmers. She taught me which plants help and which ones kill. Mara met his eyes. I know it's not much, but it's what I have. Something shifted in his expression, fear transforming into determination. Then we moved the herd. Now. They worked through the afternoon, Coulter on horseback driving the healthy cattle to the south pasture, while Mara stayed with the sick ones, doing what little she could to ease their suffering. By sunset, 2 of the 3 had died. The third was fighting, still trembling but alert enough to drink the water Mara coaxed down her throat. When Coulter returned, covered in dust and worry, Mara was sitting in the grass beside the surviving cow, stroking her flank, murmuring reassurances. We lost 2, she said quietly. He dismounted, sank down beside her, his shoulders sagging. Could have been worse. Would have been, if you hadn't known what to look for. I'm sorry I couldn't save them all. You saved the herd. That's... He stopped, his voice catching. That's everything, Mara. This ranch, these animals, they're all I have to provide for my girls. If we'd lost the whole herd... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Mara understood what he wasn't saying. 1 man, 2 daughters, a ranch barely holding together. There was no margin for error, no safety net. We'll watch the rest closely, she said. And I can make a tonic. Milk thistle and dandelion root help clear the toxins from their systems. You can make that? I can make a lot of things. If you've got the herbs. I don't. Then I'll find them. There's got to be milk thistle growing wild somewhere on this property, and dandelions everywhere this time of year. Coulter turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Working yourself half to death for a stranger's ranch. You don't owe me anything, Mara. I pulled you out of that town, but you've more than repaid that debt. It's not about debt. The words came out fierce, more honest than she'd intended. It's about having a purpose again. About feeling useful instead of useless. About... She stopped, swallowed hard. About having a reason to wake up in the morning. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. You've always had that, Coulter said quietly. You just needed people who could see it. That night, after the twins were in bed and the house was quiet, Mara sat at the kitchen table mixing herbs by candlelight. She'd spent the evening scouring the property and found everything she needed: milk thistle by the creek, dandelion in the meadow, even some wild ginger that would help with the nausea. Her hands moved with practiced precision, grinding, measuring, mixing. This was the knowledge her mother had passed down, the same knowledge that had gotten Mara labeled a witch in Ironwood. But here, in this house, it wasn't darkness. It was light. It was salvation. You should be sleeping. She looked up to find Coulter in the doorway, shirtless and rumpled, obviously woken by the sound of her mortar and pestle. Almost done, she said. He moved into the room, pulled out a chair across from her. Can't sleep? Too much to do. Always is. They sat in companionable silence while Mara finished her preparations, portioning the mixture into cloth bags that could be steeped in hot water. My wife, Coulter said suddenly. Emma. She knew plants too. Not like you do, but she had a garden. Loved it more than just about anything. It was the first time he'd mentioned her name. Mara's hands stilled. When she died, he continued, his voice rough with old grief, I let it all go wild, couldn't bear to tend it, couldn't bear to see what she'd built falling apart. So I just stopped looking. And now? Now I wonder if that was the right choice. The girls, they don't remember much about her, just fragments. June thinks she remembers her mother singing, but I'm not sure if that's real or if I just told the story so many times it became a memory. Mara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you this because... He paused, searching for words. Because you asked me once if I was lucky. And I said some days. But truth is, most days I just felt cursed. Like God took the one good thing I had and left me to raise two little girls alone in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. You're not cursed. No, he agreed, looking at her with those winter blue eyes. I don't think I am anymore. The next morning, Mara dosed the surviving cow with her tonic. The animal drank it grudgingly, shaking her massive head but swallowing. By afternoon, she was standing. By evening, she was grazing. It worked, Coulter said, something like wonder in his voice. It worked, Mara agreed. Word spread somehow, the way it always does in small communities. Within a week, 2 neighbors showed up asking if Mara could look at their sick animals. She did, mixing tonics, offering advice, refusing payment until Coulter insisted she take something. It's your knowledge, he said, your work. You deserve to be compensated. So she started accepting eggs, butter, small coins. She saved it all in a jar hidden in her room, not sure what she was saving for, but unable to shake the ingrained fear that this couldn't last. The twins were ecstatic. Every evening they'd climb into her lap, both of them somehow, despite physics, and demand stories. Mara told them everything she could remember from her own childhood, tales her mother had told, legends about brave women and clever foxes, and the spirits that lived in old trees. Tell the one about the bear again, June would say. No, the one with the woman who turned into a bird, Lily would counter. And Mara would tell both stories, weaving them together until the twins' eyes grew heavy and they slumped against her shoulders, warm and trusting and absolutely certain she would be there when they woke. One evening, as she carried June to bed, Lily already asleep in Coulter's arms, the little girl whispered against her neck, I love you, Mama. The words struck like lightning. Mara froze, halfway up the ladder to the loft. June stirred. Can I call you Mama? Mara's eyes burned. Her throat closed. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. Good, June murmured, already drifting off again. 'Cause you are. Later, after both girls were tucked in and sleeping, Mara found herself crying in the kitchen for the second time since she'd arrived. But these weren't tears of grief or pain, these were something else entirely. Coulter found her there, of course. He always seemed to know when she needed someone. "They're getting attached," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I know." "Are you?" The question should have been simple. It wasn't. "Yes," Mara whispered. He crossed the room, pulled out a chair, sat down close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Her heart hammered. "All right." "I didn't bring you here out of pity. I mean, that was part of it. Anyone with a shred of decency would have been horrified by what they were doing to you. But it wasn't just that." He paused, his jaw working. "I brought you here because when my girls said you should be their mother, something in me said yes. Even though I didn't know you. Even though it made no sense, I just knew." Mara couldn't breathe. "You don't have to say anything," Coulter continued. "And I'm not proposing, not yet, not properly. I just needed you to know that this isn't temporary for me. You're not a guest or a hired hand or a charity case. You're—" He stopped, frustrated with words. "You're theirs. And if I'm being honest, you're starting to feel like mine too." "Coulter, I know it's fast. I know it's probably too fast. But out here, time doesn't move the same way. When you find something good, you hold on to it. You fight for it. Because the things that matter are few and far between, and letting them slip away is the only sin that can't be forgiven." Mara's hands shook. She pressed them flat against the table, steadying herself. "I'm not who Ironwood said I was, but I'm not sure I'm who you think I am either. Who do I think you are? Strong, capable, someone who can build a life here. You are all those things. What if I'm not? What if I break? What if I can't—" She stopped, the old fear rising up. "What if I can't give you more children?" Coulter's expression softened. "Mara, I've got 2 daughters who already call you mama when they think I'm not listening. That's not nothing. That's everything. But no buts. I'm not my brother. I'm not the men in Ironwood who measured your worth by what your body could produce. I'm measuring it by who you are, and who you are is remarkable." The words broke something open inside her, some dam she'd been holding against the flood of hope. She started crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. Coulter reached across the table, covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as a guest, as family, as mine." And Mara, who'd been cast out and dragged through the dirt and told she was worthless, looked at this quiet man who'd given her everything without asking for anything in return, and whispered the only word that mattered. Yes. The word hung in the air between them like a promise, like a prayer answered. Coulter's hand tightened around hers, just for a moment, and then he stood, clearing his throat roughly. "Good," he said, his voice thick. "That's good." He left before Mara could say anything else, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and she heard his door close with a soft click. She sat alone in the candlelight, staring at her hand where his warmth still lingered, wondering if she'd just made the bravest decision of her life or the most foolish. Maybe both. Maybe it didn't matter. The next few weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Nothing changed, and everything changed. Mara still slept in her small room, still worked from dawn to dusk, still ate meals with Coulter and the twins at the scarred kitchen table. But there was a difference now, subtle as morning fog but just as pervasive. The way Coulter's eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she caught herself smoothing her hair before he came in from the fields. The way the twins seemed to sense something shifting, growing quieter when their father spoke to her, watching with knowing eyes far too old for their faces. They were building towards something, all 4 of them, like a house being raised beam by beam, slow, careful, solid. And then the storm came. It started with the sky. Mara noticed it first, the way the morning light had a strange greenish cast, the way the birds went silent all at once. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when the wind picked up, sudden and vicious, nearly tearing the wet sheet from her hands. "Mara!" Coulter's voice, sharp with urgency. She turned to find him striding toward her, his face set in hard lines. Get inside, now! What's wrong? Storm's coming. Bad one. He was already gathering the laundry, shoving it into the basket without bothering to fold. I've seen skies like this before. We need to secure everything. Get the animals in. Mara looked west and felt her stomach drop. The horizon had disappeared behind a wall of black cloud, roiling and churning like something alive. Lightning flickered inside it, brilliant white against the darkness. The twins? Already inside, come on! They ran. Coulter took the livestock while Mara shuttered the windows, her fingers fumbling with latches that suddenly seemed too complicated. The twins helped, their usual chatter replaced by tense silence as they dragged blankets away from the windows and piled them in the center of the main room. Is it a tornado? June asked, her voice small. Don't know yet, Coulter said, coming through the door with a gust of wind that sent papers flying. But we're not taking chances. Everyone into the root cellar if it gets worse. The storm hit like a fist. One moment there was wind and distant thunder. The next the world exploded into chaos. Rain slammed against the house in sheets so thick Mara couldn't see the barn 30 feet away. The shutters rattled despite their latches, wood groaning under the assault. Lightning struck close enough to shake the floor. Thunder following so fast there was no gap between flash and boom. The twins huddled together on the floor, hands over their ears. Mara sat with them, pulling both girls into her lap, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. Coulter stood by the window, peering through a crack in the shutter, his jaw tight. Coulter, Mara said. The barn door's open. I can see it flapping. So? So the horses are in there. If they spook and run. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Horses loose in a storm like this would be lucky to survive the night, and without horses, the ranch would be crippled. You can't go out there, Mara said. I have to. You'll be killed. He looked at her then, and she saw in his eyes the same desperate calculation she'd seen in Ironwood when he'd stepped forward to claim her. The weighing of risks, the acceptance of consequences. A man who'd do what needed doing, no matter the cost. Stay with the girls, he said. Coulter, no, but he was already moving, pulling on his oilskin coat, jamming his hat down tight. He opened the door, and the storm roared in, a living thing trying to tear the house apart. He slipped through and was gone, swallowed by the rain. Papa, Lily screamed. June was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Mara held them both, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Seconds crawled past. Minutes. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was getting worse. Something crashed outside, the sound of wood splintering. More lightning, so close the thunder was instantaneous. The house shuddered. Mara made a decision. Girls, she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. I need you to stay right here. Don't move. Don't open the door. Do you understand? Where are you going? June demanded. To help your father. But he said, I know what he said. Mara kissed both their foreheads, quick and fierce. But sometimes we have to break the rules to keep the people we love safe. Stay here. I'll be back soon. She didn't give them time to argue. She grabbed the other oilskin coat, Emma's probably, but there was no time to think about that, and plunged into the storm. The world outside was madness. Wind tore at her clothes, rain stung her face like needles. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her, could barely hear over the roar of the storm. Lightning illuminated everything in stark white flashes, there and gone, leaving her blind in the darkness between. Coulter! She screamed, but the wind ripped his name from her mouth and scattered it. She stumbled toward where the barn should be, hands outstretched, feeling her way more than seeing. Her foot caught on something, and she went down hard, palms scraping against gravel. She pushed herself up, kept moving. A shadow loomed ahead. The barn, its door swinging wild on broken hinges. She grabbed it, using all her weight to pull it closed against the wind. It fought her, bucking like a living thing. She set her feet, heaved, and the door slammed shut. There was a heavy crossbar leaning against the wall, and she wrestled it into place, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Mara! She spun. Coulter materialized from the rain, leading 2 horses, their eyes rolling white with terror. He looked shocked to see her, then furious. What the hell are you doing out here? Helping! She grabbed the second horse's bridle, steadying the animal with her voice and her hands the way she'd learned as a girl. Get them inside. No time to argue. Together, they coaxed the horses into the barn, Coulter fighting the door open just long enough to shove them through, then closing it again. The animals whinnied and stamped, but they were safe. That was what mattered. "The cattle!" Coulter shouted over the wind. "They're breaking toward the ridge." Mara's blood went cold. The ridge was a cliff that dropped 50 feet into a rocky ravine. If the cattle went over in their panic, "Show me!" they ran. Through the storm, through the darkness, following the sound of lowing cattle and the crack of breaking fences. Lightning showed her glimpses of chaos, massive shapes moving wrong, posts torn from the ground, wire tangled and deadly. The herd was a dark mass at the edge of the pasture, pressing against the last fence between them and death. A few more minutes, and it would give way, and then there'd be nothing but air between 2 tons of panicked beef and the rocks below. "We need to turn them." Coulter was already moving, waving his arms, shouting, but the cattle were beyond reason, beyond hearing. They pushed and pushed, driven by instinct and fear. Mara looked around desperately. There, the old feed wagon, half loaded with hay. An idea sparked, dangerous and probably stupid, but better than nothing. She ran to the wagon, found the oil lamp somehow still hanging from its hook, still lit by some miracle. She grabbed a handful of hay, held it to the flame until it caught, then threw it onto the pile. "Mara, what are you—" The hay went up like kindling, flames leaping high despite the rain. Mara shoved the wagon, and Coulter, understanding now, added his strength to hers. Together they pushed it between the cattle and the cliff, creating a wall of fire that made the animals balk, turn, mill in confusion. "Drive them left!" Mara screamed. "Toward the south pasture!" Coulter was already doing it, using his body and his voice to redirect the herd's momentum. Mara joined him, arms spread wide, shouting herself hoarse. The cattle turned, slowly, ponderously, like a river changing course. They moved away from the cliff, away from death, back toward the relative safety of the lower fields. It took forever. It took no time at all. By the time the last cow was clear, by the time they'd herded the entire mass through the gate into the south pasture where the fences still held, Mara was shaking with exhaustion. Her hands were torn and bleeding from wrestling with wire. Her clothes were more mud than fabric. Everything hurt. Coulter secured the gate, then turned to her, his face stark in another flash of lightning. For a moment they just stood there, rain pouring down, staring at each other. Then he pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest, his arms iron-strong around her back. "You could have died," he said into her hair. "So could you." She pressed her face against his shoulder, feeling his heart hammer beneath his ribs. "That's why I came. That's why I'll always come." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. Rain streamed between them, mixing with something else on his cheeks that might have been tears. "You saved them," he said. "You saved everything." "We saved them. Together." The storm raged around them, but for one impossible moment, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except his hands on her face, his eyes on hers, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Then a sound broke through the storm, high and desperate and terrified. "Mommy!" They turned as one. 2 small shapes were struggling through the rain, holding hands soaked to the bone. The twins. They'd left the house. "June! Lily!" Coulter started toward them, but Mara was faster, dropping to her knees as the girls crashed into her. "You were gone so long," June sobbed. "We thought the storm took you," Lily added. "I'm here. I'm here." Mara wrapped them both in her arms, sheltering them with her body as much as she could. "We're all here. We're safe." "Can we go home now?" June asked, her voice muffled against Mara's shoulder. "Home." The word struck something deep in Mara's chest. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." The walk back to the house felt like a mile, though it couldn't have been more than 100 yards. The storm was finally starting to break, the wind dying down, the rain easing from a deluge to merely heavy. They stumbled through the door in a sodden, exhausted pile, tracking mud and water across the floor Mara had scrubbed just yesterday. She didn't care. They were alive. They were together. That was all that mattered. Coulter got the fire going while Mara stripped the twins out of their wet clothes and wrapped them in blankets. The girls were still crying, clinging to her, and she let them, rocking them both and murmuring the same reassurances her own mother had once given her after nightmares. You're safe. You're loved. Nothing's going to hurt you. Eventually, their tears slowed, their trembling eased. They fell asleep curled together like puppies, still wrapped in their blankets, still holding on to Mara's hands. I'll carry them up, Coulter said quietly, but when he tried to lift June, she whimpered and tightened her grip on Mara. Don't go. I'm not going anywhere, Mara promised. So they stayed there, all four of them, in front of the fire. Coulter brought more blankets and Mara settled in with a twin on each side, their heads heavy on her shoulders. Coulter sat across from them, his back against the wall, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. They called you Mommy, he said after a long silence. I know. Not Mama, not Miss Mara, Mommy. I heard. Mara stroked June's damp hair, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Is that all right? All right? Coulter's laugh was rough, broken. Mara, it's everything. It's what I've been hoping for since the day I brought you here. They're not mine. Not really. Aren't they? He leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. Blood doesn't make a mother. Love does. Care does. Being there when they need you, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He paused, his throat working. You ran into a storm to save this ranch. You risked your life for animals you have no legal claim to, for a family that isn't yours by any law or contract. If that's not love, I don't know what is. Mara's vision blurred. I couldn't lose you. Any of you. I've lost too much already. So have I. Coulter stood, crossed the small distance between them, and sank down beside her. Close enough that their shoulders touched. Close enough that she could feel his warmth even through the damp clothes. Which is why I'm not waiting anymore. Waiting for what? To ask you properly. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. Mara Ellington, will you marry me? Not out of convenience, not out of need, but because I want you as my wife. Because my girls need you as their mother. Because this house hasn't felt like a home since Emma died, and you've brought it back to life in ways I didn't think were possible. The twins stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Mara looked down at them, these precious souls who'd claimed her as their own, who'd called her Mommy without hesitation or doubt. Then she looked at Coulter, this quiet man who'd seen her at her lowest and decided she was worth saving. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He cupped her cheek with one rough hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Thank you, he said simply. They sat like that as the fire burned low and the storm finally passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and new. Somewhere in the settling darkness, Mara felt something shift inside her chest, some final wall crumbling away. She'd been so afraid for so long, afraid of being unwanted, unneeded, unloved. But here, in this fire-lit room with two sleeping children and a man who looked at her like she'd hung the stars, she finally understood what it meant to belong. Dawn came cold and clear. Mara woke to find herself still on the floor, the twins sprawled across her like blankets, Coulter asleep sitting up, his head tilted back against the wall. Every muscle in her body screamed protest as she carefully extracted herself from the pile of sleeping bodies. Outside, the storm's aftermath was brutal. Fences down everywhere, branches littering the yard, the garden she'd worked so hard to restore half drowned under standing water. The wagon she'd set on fire was a charred skeleton in the pasture, but the barn still stood. The house still stood. And when she checked the south pasture, the cattle were grazing peacefully in the early light as if last night had never happened. She was surveying the damage to the chicken coop when she heard hoofbeats. A rider appeared at the end of the drive, moving fast. As he got closer, Mara recognized him, Tom Hendricks, the neighbor Coulter had mentioned, the one who thought Coulter had it too good. Where's Rowan? Hendricks called, not bothering with pleasantries. Sleeping. It was a long night. I'll bet. Hendricks dismounted, looking around at the destruction. Heard you had some excitement. The storm hit hard. We lost some fencing. That all you lost? His eyes were sharp, calculating. My boy was out checking our herds at first light. Said he saw fire over this way. Thought maybe the barn had gone up. Just an old wagon. We used it to turn the cattle away from the ridge. Hendricks' eyebrows rose. The ridge? They got that far? They would have gone over if we hadn't stopped them. We? Now his gaze was assessing her differently, taking in her torn hands, her muddy clothes, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. You were out in that? Someone had to be. A slow smile crossed his weathered face. Well, I'll be damned. You're the widow from Ironwood, aren't you? The one Coulter took in after that business with Huxley. Mara lifted her chin. I am. Heard tell you were cursed. Bad luck to everyone around you. You heard wrong. I'm starting to think I did. Hendricks glanced at the house, where Coulter was emerging onto the porch, the twins clinging to his legs. Seems like Coulter's luck has turned right around since you showed up. That's because she's family now, Coulter said, his voice carrying clear across the yard. He didn't raise it, didn't need to. The words had weight all on their own. Anyone got a problem with that can take it up with me. Hendricks held up his hands. No problem here. Just came to check you survived the storm. And to say, he paused, looking uncomfortable. My wife wanted me to invite you all to supper next week. Proper-like, as neighbors should. It was an olive branch. More than that, it was acceptance. We'd be honored, Coulter said. After Hendricks left, Coulter pulled Mara aside while the twins investigated the storm damage with the fearless enthusiasm of children who didn't understand how close they'd come to disaster. He'll talk, Coulter said, about last night, about what you did. Word will spread. Is that a problem? Problem? Mara, you just earned more respect in one night than most people get in a lifetime out here. Hendricks is influential. He's on the church board, the town council, everything. If he says you're all right, the others will listen. And if they don't? Coulter's jaw set in that stubborn line she was learning to recognize. Then they can deal with me. The next few days were consumed with repairs. Fences to mend, debris to clear, damage to assess. Neighbors started showing up, first one or two, then more, offering help and not so subtly trying to get a look at the woman who'd supposedly saved the Rowan Ranch single-handedly. Mara deflected their curiosity as best she could, working alongside them without complaint, proving through action rather than words that she was exactly who Coulter claimed. Family. On the third day after the storm, a wagon appeared carrying not supplies, but people. Mrs. Chen from the Ironwood boarding house, her round face creased with worry, and beside her an older couple Mara didn't recognize. Mara! Mrs. Chen climbed down with surprising agility for a woman of her age. Thank the heavens you're safe. When we heard about the storm, I'm fine, Mara said, though her bandaged hands told a different story. What are you doing here? Bringing these folks to see you, Mrs. Chen gestured at the older couple who were climbing down more slowly. This is Robert and Grace Morrison. They've come all the way from Helena. The names meant nothing to Mara, but something in Mrs. Chen's expression said they should. Mrs. Ellington, the man, Robert said, removing his hat. His wife stayed close to his side, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. We've been searching for you for months. Searching for me? Why? Because your family, Grace Morrison said, her voice breaking. Samuel, your late husband, he was my nephew. His mother was my sister. The world tilted. Mara had known Samuel was orphaned young, raised by an uncle who'd died before they married. She'd thought she was alone in the world, the last of her line, but here were two people claiming kinship, claiming connection. I don't understand, she said. We only just found out Samuel had died, Robert explained. We've been in the territories for 3 years, out of touch. When we came back and heard... He stopped, his face crumpling. We came as fast as we could. Went to Ironwood first. They told us terrible things. That you'd been cast out, Grace added, her hands twisting together. That you disappeared. We were so afraid. I'm all right, Mara said quickly. I found a place here. With him? Robert was looking past her at Coulter, who'd emerged from the barn at the sound of voices. His expression was carefully neutral, but Mara could see the tension in his shoulders. Yes, with him. She turned, held out her hand. Coulter took it without hesitation, his grip solid and sure. Coulter Rowan, these are Samuel's aunt and uncle, Robert and Grace Morrison. Understanding flickered in Coulter's eyes. He'd probably guessed what this meant, that Mara had family now, people who might want to take her away, give her a different future than the one they'd started building together. "Pleased to meet you," he said, his voice even. "You're welcome to stay. We've got room." That night, after the Morrisons had been settled in the spare room and the twins had been convinced to go to bed, despite their excitement over having visitors, Mara found herself alone with her newfound relatives at the kitchen table. "He seems like a good man," Grace said carefully. "Mr. Rowan." "He is. And those little girls, they clearly adore you." "I adore them." Robert cleared his throat. "Mara, we want you to know, we're not here to take you away. We're here to make sure you're all right, that you're where you want to be." "I am." "Even after everything? After what Ironwood did to you?" Grace's eyes were fierce with anger. "We heard what that reverend said, how they treated you. It's unconscionable. It doesn't matter anymore." And the truth was, it didn't. Ironwood felt like another lifetime, another person's pain. "I'm happy here. Happier than I've been since Samuel died. Maybe happier than I've ever been." "Then we're happy for you," Robert said. "But Mara, there's something you should know. Samuel had an inheritance, not much, but some. His uncle left him a small property up north, and there was a bit of money set aside. It's yours now by right." Mara stared. "I didn't know." "Samuel probably didn't either. The lawyers only tracked us down last month. It's not a fortune, maybe $300 and 20 acres of timberland, but it's something. It's security." $300. In Mara's world, that was a fortune. More money than she'd ever imagined having. Enough to start over anywhere, to be independent, to owe no one anything. She looked down at her bandaged hands, thought about the garden she'd reclaimed, the cattle she'd saved, the twins sleeping upstairs who called her mommy. Thought about Coulter and the way he'd asked her to marry him, not out of need, but out of want. "Can I give it away?" she asked. Both Morrisons blinked. "Give it away?" Grace repeated. The money. Can I use it however I want?" "Of course, it's yours." "Then I want to put it into this ranch, into improvements, repairs, maybe hiring some help so Coulter doesn't have to work himself to death." She met their eyes steadily. "This is my home now. These are my people. I want to invest in our future." A smile broke across Grace's face. "Samuel chose well when he chose you." "I like to think so." They stayed for 3 days, the Morrisons, and in that time Mara learned more about Samuel's family history than he'd ever told her. Learned that there were good people in the world who didn't judge her for her body or her perceived failures. Learned that family wasn't just blood, it was choice, commitment, the daily decision to show up and care. On their last morning, Grace pulled Mara aside. "There's one more thing. Samuel's mother, my sister, she kept journals, dozens of them, going back years. They're in storage in Helena. I'd like to send them to you if you want them." "Why?" "Because they're part of Samuel's history, and because she wrote about her own struggles to have children, about the grief of losing babies, about the way people judged her for it." Grace's eyes were kind, knowing. "I thought you might want to know you're not alone in that particular pain." Mara's throat closed. "Thank you." "And Mara?" Grace squeezed her hand. "You're not barren. You're not cursed. You're just unlucky in some ways and incredibly lucky in others. Don't let anyone tell you different." After they left, after the wagon had disappeared down the road taking the Morrisons back toward Helena and their own lives, Coulter found Mara standing in the garden, staring at nothing. "You all right?" he asked. "I have family," she said wonderingly. "Real family. People who care." "You always had that." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. "The twins, me, we've been your family since the day you got here. Blood doesn't make it more real." "I know, but it helps." She turned to face him. "They told me about Samuel's inheritance, about the money." His expression shuddered slightly. "That's good. You'll have security, options. I want to put it into the ranch." "Mara, you don't have to." "I want to. This is my home. You're my... She paused, searching for the right word. You're my future. If you'll still have me. The shutters came down, replaced by something fierce and tender. If I'll still have you? Mara, I'm standing here terrified you'll realize you don't need me anymore, that you could do better. She kissed him. It was quick, clumsy, more desperation than romance. But it was real. When she pulled back, Coulter was staring at her with wonder written across his weathered face. I love you, she said. I think I have since the day you cut me free in Ironwood. And if you love me even a fraction as much, that's more than I ever thought I'd have. A fraction? His laugh was shaky. Mara, He stopped, swallowed hard. I fell for you the moment my daughters said you should be their mother, and every cell in my body said yes. I just didn't know how to tell you. You just did. He kissed her then, properly this time, his hands gentle on her face, his lips warm against hers. It was a promise and a beginning, and everything Mara had ever wanted wrapped up in one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning like fools, they found the twins watching from the porch, bouncing with excitement. Does this mean you're getting married? June shouted. Does this mean you're staying forever? Lily added. Mara looked at Coulter, saw her own happiness reflected in his eyes. Yes, they said together, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, not a threat this time, but an echo, a reminder of the storm they'd weathered and survived, together. The twins came running, crashing into them both with the full force of childhood joy, and for a moment the four of them were just a tangle of arms and laughter and hope. But even as Mara held them close, even as Coulter's arms settled warm and solid around her shoulders, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Ironwood would have to know, and Ironwood would have something to say about it. The summons came 3 days later, delivered by a grim-faced rider Mara didn't recognize. He handed Coulter a sealed letter, tipped his hat, and left without a word. Coulter read it in silence, his jaw tightening with each line. What is it? Mara asked, though she already knew. She'd been expecting this, dreading it, preparing for it in the quiet spaces between work and sleep. Town meeting, tomorrow night. Reverend Huxley is calling for your removal from my home. He crumpled the paper in his fist, his knuckles white. He's claiming moral grounds. Says you're living in sin, corrupting my daughters, making a mockery of Christian values. He would. Mara felt oddly calm, like she'd used up all her fear in the storm and had none left for this. What do you want to do? Ignore it. He's got no legal standing, no actual authority. You're here because I want you here. And if the town sides with him? Coulter's eyes were ice-cold fury. Let them try. But Mara knew it wasn't that simple. Out here, community opinion mattered. A man could survive being disliked, but he couldn't thrive. His daughters couldn't grow up healthy and whole if they were shunned, whispered about, treated as pariahs because their father chose the wrong woman. We should go, she said quietly. Mara, not to defend myself, not to beg, but to face them. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not running anymore, Coulter. I ran from Ironwood once already. Let them drag me through the dirt without fighting back. I won't do it again. Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to fierce pride. Then we go together, all of us. The twins? Stay with Mrs. Chen. I'll arrange it. He pulled her close, his hand warm against the small of her back. But when we walk into that church, we walk in as a family, and we walk out the same way, no matter what they say. The next evening, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Coulter hitched the wagon and helped Mara up onto the bench seat. She wore the blue dress, Emma's dress, freshly washed and mended where the storm had torn it. Her hair was braided and pinned, her hands bandaged but clean. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd worked hard and survived harder, who had nothing to be ashamed of. The twins had cried when they realized they weren't coming, but Mrs. Chen had swept them into her boarding house with promises of fresh biscuits and stories, and their tears had dried quickly. Still, Mara's heart ached, leaving them behind. What if something went wrong? What if Huxley managed to turn the town against her completely, and she couldn't come back? Stop, Coulter said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Stop what? thinking about all the ways this could go bad. We're stronger than they are. Remember that. The ride to Ironwood took an hour, the familiar rutted road stretching ahead like a path to judgment. Mara watched the landscape roll by, golden grasslands turning amber in the fading light, stands of pine dark against the sky, the mountains rising in the distance like silent witnesses. This was her home now, this wild, beautiful country, not Ironwood, not some cramped room in a boarding house where she survived on scraps and pity. The town appeared gradually, lights flickering to life in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked the same as it always had, respectable, orderly, clean. But Mara knew what lay beneath that veneer, knew the cruelty that could hide behind whitewashed walls and Sunday prayers. The church stood at the center of town, its steeple pointing toward heaven like an accusation. Wagons and horses crowded the street outside, the entire population of Ironwood packed into the building for what they probably thought would be entertainment, a spectacle. The fallen widow brought low one final time. Coulter pulled the wagon to a stop but didn't immediately dismount. Instead, he turned to Mara, his hand finding hers. "Last chance to change your mind," he said. "We can turn around right now. Tell them all to go to hell. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? No." She squeezed his fingers, drew strength from his steady presence. "I want to face them. I want them to see what they threw away." A smile ghosted across his face. "That's my girl." They climbed down together, and Mara felt every eye turn toward them as they approached the church steps. The crowd parted like water, people stepping back, whispers rising and falling. She kept her chin high, her spine straight, her hand firmly in Coulter's as they walked through the door. Inside, the church was packed. Every pew filled, people standing along the walls, more crowded in the doorway behind them. Reverend Huxley stood at the pulpit, his narrow face set in lines of righteous disapproval. Beside him sat the town council, 5 men Mara recognized, merchants and landowners who'd never once spoken to her with kindness. And there, in the front row, sat Dalton Pruitt, Samuel's brother, the man who'd shoved her into the street all those weeks ago. He was watching her with undisguised hatred, his meaty hands clenched into fists. Huxley raised his hands for silence. The whispers died instantly. "We are gathered here," he intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the building, "to address a matter of grave moral concern. Mara Ellington, widow of our departed brother Samuel, has taken up residence in the home of Coulter Rowan, unmarried and unchaperoned, presenting a scandalous example to his innocent daughters and bringing shame upon this community." "That's not—" Mara started, but Coulter's hand tightened on hers. "Let him talk," he murmured. "He'll hang himself with his own rope." Huxley continued, warming to his subject. "The Bible is clear on such matters. A woman of virtue guards her reputation as her most precious possession. She does not live openly with a man outside the bonds of holy matrimony. She does not—" "We're engaged," Coulter said, his voice cutting through Huxley's sermon like a blade. "Have been for weeks. So unless you're planning to lecture us on the exact timeline of courtship, I suggest you save your breath." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Huxley's face darkened. "Engaged," he repeated, making the word sound obscene. "How convenient. And when, pray tell, did this engagement occur?" "The night of the storm. I asked, she said yes, and we've been preparing to make it official ever since." "Preparing?" Huxley's lip curled. "While living under the same roof. While she played mother to your children and shared your table and your—" "Careful," Coulter said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You're in a house of God. Might want to watch what you accuse people of without proof." "The proof is in the living arrangement itself. A decent woman would never—" "A decent woman saved my ranch," Coulter interrupted. "Saved my cattle, my horses, damn near saved my life when I was stupid enough to go out in that storm alone. A decent woman worked herself to the bone to help a stranger because that's who she is. Someone who gives everything and asks for nothing. So before you stand there and tell me what a decent woman would or wouldn't do, maybe you should ask yourself what a decent man would do. Because, from where I'm standing, there aren't many of those in this room." The silence that followed was absolute. Huxley's face had gone from red to purple, his hand shaking with barely contained rage. "You dare! I dare!" Coulter took a step forward, pulling Mara with him. "I dare to say that this woman is worth 10 of you. that she's shown more courage, more faith, more actual Christian charity in 2 months than you've shown in your entire career of judgment and condemnation. And if you or anyone else in this town has a problem with me marrying her, then you can say it to my face right now." No one spoke. Somewhere in the back, a baby whimpered and was quickly shushed. Then a woman stood up. Mara recognized her, Margaret Hendricks, Tom's wife, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair and a reputation for running her household with military precision. "I have something to say," Margaret announced. Huxley looked like he'd rather swallow glass, but he nodded. "Proceed." Margaret turned to face the crowd, her back straight as a rifle barrel. "I know most of you think I'm too hard, too unforgiving. And maybe I am. But I'm also fair. And it's not fair what we did to this woman." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the church. "When Samuel Ellington died," Margaret continued, "we should have rallied around his widow. Should have helped her, supported her, made sure she had what she needed. Instead, we blamed her for not giving him children, as if that was her choice, as if God's will could be changed by want or effort." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "My own daughter tried for 8 years to have a baby, 8 years of hoping and praying and failing. Should I have called her cursed, barren, unwomanly?" "That's different," someone started to say. "It's not different," Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. "And if you can't see that, if you can't see the cruelty in what we did, then you're not the Christians you claim to be." She sat down heavily, her husband's hand finding hers in support. Mara felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of these people." Another person stood, then another. One by one, people began speaking, some in her defense, some in Huxley's, the arguments growing heated and tangled. Mara heard pieces of her own story twisted and retold, facts mixed with fiction until she barely recognized the narrative. "Enough!" Dalton Pruitt's voice boomed out, silencing the crowd. He stood, his bulk impressive and threatening in the cramped space. "You all want to talk about decency? About what's right? This woman killed my brother." "He was kicked by a horse," Mara said, finding her voice at last. "It was an accident." "Was it? Or did you drive him to distraction with your failures? Did you make him so miserable he stopped paying attention, stopped being careful?" Dalton's eyes were wild, grief and rage twisting his features. "He was a good man before he married you, strong, capable. And then you came along with your herbs and your strangeness, and you hollowed him out from the inside. By the time he died, there was nothing left." "That's not true," Mara said, but her voice was shaking now. Because part of her had always wondered the same thing. Part of her had always feared that she really was poison, that everything she touched turned to dust and death. "Isn't it? My luck's been sour since you left his house. Crops failing, livestock sick, money disappearing. You cursed me just like you cursed him." "Your crops are failing because you don't rotate them," Mara shot back, anger burning away the fear. "Your livestock is sick because you water them downstream from the tannery, and your money disappears because you gamble it away every Saturday night at the saloon. I didn't curse you, Dalton. You did that all by yourself." The crowd gasped. Dalton's face went crimson. "You can't talk to me like that." "I just did." Mara stepped forward, breaking free of Coulter's steadying hand. She was done hiding, done cowering. If they wanted to judge her, fine. But they'd do it while looking her in the eye. "You want to blame me for Samuel's death? Go ahead. Blame me for the weather too, for the hard times, for every bit of bad luck that's ever crossed your path. But it won't change the truth." "And what's that?" Huxley asked coldly. "That I loved Samuel, that I mourned him, that I tried to be a good wife even when you all made it clear I was failing." Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "I couldn't give him children. I know that. I live with that every day. But I gave him everything else, my work, my care, my whole heart. And it still wasn't enough for this town. It was never going to be enough." "So you ran to the first man who'd take you in," Huxley said. "How very convenient." "I didn't run. I was dragged through the street like an animal and left to die in the dirt. And yes, Coulter took me in. He gave me shelter when you gave me nothing but cruelty. He offered me kindness when you offered me only judgment. And if that makes him a sinner in your eyes, Then your eyes are blind. You speak of kindness, Huxley said, his voice dripping venom. But what kind of kindness teaches children that sin is acceptable? That living in defiance of God's law is something to celebrate? I teach those girls to be brave, Mara said, to be strong, to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. If that's sin, then I'll sin gladly. The church erupted, people shouting, arguing, some rising to their feet in outrage, others nodding in reluctant agreement. Huxley was calling for order, his voice lost in the chaos. And then a new voice cut through the noise, clear and carrying and utterly unexpected. She teaches them about plants. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood Mrs. Chen, her round face flushed from hurrying, and beside her, holding her hands, were June and Lily. Girls, Coulter said, half warning, half question. You were supposed to stay. We wanted to help, June said, her small voice somehow reaching every corner of the silent church. We wanted to tell everyone the truth. Lily nodded vigorously. Mara's good. She makes us breakfast and fixes our clothes and tells us stories. And she saved the cows when they were sick. She did, Tom Hendricks called from his seat beside Margaret. Saved Coulter's whole herd with some kind of tonic. Saved ours, too, when we had the same problem the following week. And she fixed my rheumatism, Mrs. Chen added. First time in 10 years I could work without pain. She helped my wife through a difficult childbirth, another voice added. The blacksmith, a burly man named John, who rarely spoke up, knew exactly what herbs to use when the midwife was lost. One by one, voices began rising from the crowd. Small testimonies, quiet acknowledgments of help given, kindness offered, problems solved. Mara stood frozen, listening to people she'd thought hated her describe moments she'd almost forgotten. A poultice here, a bit of advice there, help offered without expectation of return. She's still living in sin, Huxley insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. The law of God. We'll be satisfied in 2 weeks, Coulter interrupted. That's when we're getting married. Church wedding, legal and proper, with the whole town invited if they want to come. But we're doing it on our terms, in our time, and anyone who has a problem with that can stay home. He looked at Mara, his eyes asking a question. She nodded, her heart too full for words. 2 weeks, he repeated, addressing the crowd now. You all want to judge us? Fine. Come to the wedding. Watch us make vows before God and everyone. See for yourselves what kind of woman Mara Ellington really is, and then try telling me she's not worthy of respect. Huxley opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For once, he seemed to have no words. It was one of the council members who broke the stalemate, Joseph Wright, who owned the general store and had always struck Mara as a fair man, if distant. Seems to me, he said slowly, that we've got a choice here. We can keep tearing at old wounds, keep judging people for things they can't control. Or we can accept that maybe we were wrong, that maybe we let fear and prejudice cloud our judgment. He looked at Mara directly. I'm man enough to admit when I've made a mistake, and I made one with you, Mrs. Ellington. We all did. Here, Margaret Hendricks said firmly. Others began nodding, murmuring agreement. Not everyone. Dalton Pruitt sat stone-faced and silent, and Huxley looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. But enough to matter. Then we're done here, Coulter said. He held out his hand to Mara. Come on, let's go home. They walked out of the church together, the twins running ahead, Mrs. Chen following with a satisfied smile. Behind them, Mara could hear the crowd dispersing, voices raised in continued argument, but lacking the earlier venom. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Mara breathed deep, feeling something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness. She wasn't sure she could forgive Ironwood. Not fully. Not yet. But release. The letting go of a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. You were magnificent, Coulter said quietly, helping her into the wagon. I was terrified. Doesn't make it less magnificent. He climbed up beside her, the twins piling into the back, still chattering excitedly about their grand entrance. You faced them down, made them see you. Some of them, maybe. That's all we can ask for. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. The rest will come around or they won't. But it doesn't matter. We've got what's important. Mara looked at the twins, already half asleep against each other in the wagon bed, their faces peaceful in the lamplight. Looked at Coulter, steady and solid beside her. Looked at the road ahead, leading away from Ironwood and toward the ranch, toward home. Yes, she said softly. We do. The ride back was quiet, peaceful in a way the ride there hadn't been. The twins fell asleep completely, lulled by the wagon's motion. Coulter drove with one hand, the other never leaving Mara's, and they didn't talk because they didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. When they finally reached the ranch, the house dark and waiting, Coulter carried the twins inside one by one while Mara lit lamps and stoked the fire. The familiar routine of settling in for the night felt different somehow, deeper, more permanent, like they'd crossed some invisible threshold and there was no going back. After the girls were tucked in, after the doors were locked and the lamps turned low, Mara found herself alone with Coulter in the kitchen, the silence stretching between them, not awkward, but full. 2 weeks, she said. Did you mean that? Every word. Unless you want longer? I can wait if you need time. No. She caught his hand, held it between both of hers. 2 weeks is perfect. I don't want to wait anymore. Don't want to keep living in this in-between space, not quite married, but not quite separate. I want to be your wife, Coulter. Fully. Completely. His eyes darkened with emotion too complex to name. I'll talk to the minister in the next town over. Get everything arranged proper. Not Huxley? Never Huxley. He had his chance to be part of this, and he chose judgment instead. Coulter lifted her hand, pressed a kiss to her scarred knuckles. We'll do this right, Mara. I promise you that. I know you will. She paused, then added quietly, Thank you for fighting for me tonight, for believing I was worth it. You are worth it, worth that and more. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and she let herself lean into his strength. I meant what I said in there. You're the best thing that's happened to this family in years. The girls know it. I know it. And now the whole damn town knows it too. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the lamplight, while outside the Montana night settled deep and quiet around them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The wind whispered through the pines. And inside the Rowan ranch house, a family that had been broken was finally beginning to heal. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mara enlisted Margaret Hendrick's help. The older woman showed up 3 days after the town meeting with an armful of fabric and a gleam in her eye that suggested she was thoroughly enjoying having a project. Every bride deserves a proper dress, Margaret declared, spreading the cloth across the kitchen table, even one getting married under unusual circumstances. You don't have to, hush. I want to. Call it my apology for taking too long to stand up for you. They worked together in the evenings after the day's chores were done, cutting and pinning and sewing while the twins watched in fascination. The dress took shape slowly, simple but elegant cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs that Margaret had saved from her own wedding decades earlier. Something borrowed, she said, stitching it in place with careful precision. For luck. Other women from the valley began arriving too, bringing gifts and offerings. Not all of them. Ironwood still had its share of people who refused to accept Mara, who muttered about sin and propriety and proper waiting periods. But enough came that Mara felt for the first time in her life what it meant to be part of a community of women. They taught her the local customs, the traditions expected at a ranch wedding. They shared recipes for the feast that would follow the ceremony. They gossiped and laughed and welcomed her into their circle with a warmth that made her throat tight. Coulter, meanwhile, threw himself into fixing up the house. The addition he'd abandoned 3 years ago suddenly became urgent, and he worked late into the evenings hammering and sawing, the twins his enthusiastic, if not always helpful, assistants. What's he building? Mara asked Mrs. Chen, who'd become a regular visitor. The older woman smiled mysteriously. You'll see soon enough. On the morning of the wedding, Mara woke before dawn to find the house already bustling with activity. Margaret had arrived with her daughters, and together they'd transformed the main room into something out of a dream. Wildflowers in jars on every surface, ribbons strung from the rafters, the long table covered with food that neighbors had been dropping off since sunrise. Come on, Margaret said, shooing Mara toward her small room. Let's get you ready." The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves and falling to her ankles in soft folds. Margaret pinned her hair up, weaving in small white flowers, then stepped back to assess her work. "Beautiful," she pronounced. "Absolutely beautiful." Mara looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd thought she'd never feel again. A knock at the door made them both turn. "It's time," Tom Hendricks called. "Everyone's ready." The ceremony was held outside under the spreading branches of an old oak tree that Coulter said had stood on the property since before his grandfather's time. The minister from Silver Creek stood beneath it, his kind face creased in a smile, and gathered around were nearly 50 people, neighbors from the valley, a few cautious visitors from Ironwood, Mrs. Chen and her family, even the Morrisons who'd traveled back from Helena. The twins stood at the front in matching dresses that Margaret's daughters had sewn, their faces solemn with the weight of their important role. They held hands, watching the path for their mother. Because that's what Mara was now. What she'd been from the moment they claimed her. Not Miss Mara or Papa's friend, but mother. Mama. Theirs. Coulter stood beside the minister in his best suit, his hair slicked back, his face showing every bit of the nervousness he'd tried to hide. When he saw Mara emerge from the house on Tom Hendricks' arm, the older man having offered to give her away when she'd admitted she had no one else, his expression transformed into something that made her heart skip. The walk to the oak tree felt both infinite and instantaneous. Then she was there, standing beside Coulter, his hand finding hers and holding tight. The minister began speaking, his words washing over them like a blessing. Mara tried to listen, to remember each phrase for later, but all she could focus on was Coulter's eyes on hers, steady and sure. "Do you, Coulter James Rowan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt. "And do you, Mara Christine Ellington, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She thought of everything that had led to this moment, the dragging through the dirt, the rescue, the slow building of trust and family, the storm and the terror, and the realization that she'd found something worth fighting for. "I do," she said, her voice carrying clear and strong. The minister smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Coulter pulled her close and kissed her while the crowd cheered and the twins squealed with delight. It was sweet and brief and perfect, a promise sealed in front of God and everyone. When they broke apart, Coulter was grinning, and Mara realized she was too, so wide her face hurt. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, testing the name. "Mr. Rowan," she replied, loving the sound of it. The celebration lasted well into the evening, the yard filling with music and laughter as neighbors shared food and stories. The twins danced themselves into exhaustion and had to be carried to bed by Mrs. Chen, still protesting they weren't tired. Mara accepted congratulations from what felt like hundreds of people, her cheeks aching from smiling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Coulter pulled her away from the crowd. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I want to show you something." He led her to the addition he'd been working on, the one she hadn't been allowed to see. It was finished now, a new room added to the side of the house with its own door and windows. Coulter opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. Inside was a bedroom, simply furnished but beautiful. A large bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser with a mirror, a rocking chair by the window. But what made Mara's breath catch was the wall of shelves, floor to ceiling, already half filled with jars and books and tools. "For your herbs," Coulter explained, "and your medicines. I figured you'd need a proper space to work, somewhere you could organize everything, keep it all in one place." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "If you don't like it, we can change." She kissed him, cutting off his words. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect." "I'm really not, but I'm trying to be worthy of you." "You already are." They stood there in their new room, in the house they'd make a home together, while outside their friends and neighbors celebrated, and the twins slept, and the Montana stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Welcome home, Mrs. Rowan, Coulter said softly. And Mara, who'd been homeless and hopeless such a short time ago, looked around at everything she'd been given, the room, the family, the love, and felt the last piece of her broken heart finally slot back into place. I'm home, she agreed. The celebration wound down as the moon rose high and silver over the valley, the last of the neighbors heading home with waves and promises to visit soon. Mara and Coulter stood on the porch watching the final wagon disappear down the road, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. Tired? He asked. Exhausted. Happy. Both. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Come on, let's check on the girls before we turn in. They climbed the ladder to the loft together, moving quietly so as not to wake the twins. But June and Lily were already awake, sitting up in their shared bed with identical expressions of barely contained excitement. We waited, June whispered loudly. We wanted to say goodnight proper, Lily added. Now that you're really truly married. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, Coulter beside her, and both girls immediately crawled into their laps like they were half their age instead of nearly 5. You look so pretty, June said, touching the flowers still pinned in Mara's hair. Like a princess. And Papa looked handsome, Lily said loyally, even though he was nervous. I was not nervous, Coulter protested. You were too. Your hands were shaking. That's because it was important. When something matters that much, it's all right to be a little nervous. June looked up at Mara with those serious eyes that sometimes seemed far too old. Are you nervous now? About being our mama for real? Mara's throat tightened. She cupped June's small face in her hand, then Lily's, looking at each of them in turn. Not nervous, grateful. You two gave me something I thought I'd never have. A family, daughters, a reason to wake up every morning and fight to be better than I was the day before. So no, sweetheart, I'm not nervous. I'm honored. Even though we're not yours by blood? Lily asked, her voice very small. Especially because of that. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. Choice does. And I choose you every single day, both of you, forever. The twins looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them, then threw themselves at Mara simultaneously, nearly knocking her backward off the bed. Coulter steadied her while she wrapped her arms around the girls, holding them close, breathing in the scent of their hair and the absolute rightness of this moment. We choose you too, Mama, June whispered. Forever and ever, Lily agreed. They stayed like that until the girls' breathing deepened and their grips loosened, sleep finally claiming them. Coulter helped Mara tuck them in, pulling the blanket up to their chins, smoothing back their matching braids. They're ours now, he said quietly as they descended the ladder. Legally, officially, in every way that matters. They always were. The papers just made it official. In their new room, their room together, Mara unpinned the flowers from her hair while Coulter lit the lamp on the bedside table. The light caught on the shelves he'd built, on the jars she'd already started filling with herbs and remedies, on the books the Morrisons had sent from Helena, along with Samuel's mother's journals. I read some of those journals, Mara said, nodding toward the stack. The ones from Grace, about Samuel's mother. And she had 4 miscarriages before she had Samuel, lost another baby after, spent years thinking she was cursed, that God was punishing her for some sin she couldn't name. Mara's voice caught. She wrote about how the other women in her town treated her, the whispers and the pity and the judgment. It could have been me writing those words. Coulter came to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. But it wasn't. You're here, you're safe, and you've got 2 daughters who love you more than anything in this world. I know, and I'm grateful. But I also keep thinking about all the women like us, like me and Samuel's mother, who've been told they're failures because their bodies didn't cooperate with someone else's timeline. She turned to face him. I want to help them. The women who come to me with fertility problems or difficult pregnancies or just the weight of everyone's expectations crushing them. Then help them. You've already been doing it, haven't you, with the remedies and the advice? I want to do more. Maybe set up a proper practice, somewhere women can come without judgment, somewhere they can talk about the things no one wants to discuss in polite company. A slow smile spread across Coulter's face. That inheritance money from Samuel, the $300 you wanted to put into the ranch. Yes? Use some of it for this instead. Build yourself a proper clinic, stock it with supplies. Let people know you're available to help. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You've spent too long making yourself smaller to fit other people's expectations. Time to take up all the space you deserve. Mara felt something crack open in her chest, some last barrier she'd been holding against hope. You really mean that? Every word. This ranch is doing well enough now. We've got help lined up for harvest, the cattle herd is healthy, and with both of us working together, we can manage just fine. But what you're talking about, that's important work, Mara. Work that could change lives. I'm not going to stand in the way of that. She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, she said. I don't think I've actually said it enough, but I do. So much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. From that first day in Ironwood when my daughters looked at you and saw a mother, and I looked at you and saw my future. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his entire face. Took me a while to admit it, but it was always true. That night, lying beside him in the darkness with his arm around her waist and his breathing steady against her neck, Mara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and the shame and the absolute certainty that she'd never be anything more than Ironwood's discarded widow. And then the impossible rescue, the slow building of trust, the storm that had changed everything. She thought about the women she'd help tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days to come. Thought about the girls sleeping upstairs who'd claimed her as theirs without hesitation or conditions. Thought about the man beside her who'd seen her at her lowest and decided she was worth fighting for. And for the first time in her entire life, Mara Rowan, didn't wonder if she was enough. She knew she was. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, like something they'd been practicing for years instead of months. Mara woke before dawn to start breakfast while Coulter handled the early morning feeding. The twins would stumble down from the loft sleepy and disheveled, and they'd all eat together as the sun climbed over the eastern peaks, planning the day's work over coffee and conversation. Word of Mara's skills continued to spread. Women started appearing at the ranch, some on horseback, some in wagons, a few on foot from neighboring homesteads. They came with whispered questions and quiet desperation, seeking help for problems they couldn't discuss with the male doctor in Ironwood or the judgmental midwife who'd been practicing for 40 years and had strong opinions about women's moral failings. Mara helped them all, the young bride struggling with painful monthlies that left her bedridden 3 days a month, the older woman whose body was betraying her in ways no one had prepared her for, the expectant mother terrified of childbirth after losing her first baby. Each one found in Mara's new workspace not just remedies but understanding, not just medical knowledge but compassion. She never charged more than they could afford, sometimes taking payment in eggs or vegetables or future favors. Coulter watched her work with quiet pride, never complaining about the constant stream of visitors or the way her attention was divided between the ranch and her calling. You're building something important, he told her one evening after she'd spent 3 hours with a woman having early labor pains, managing to stop the contractions and save the pregnancy. The valley needs this, needs you. But not everyone was pleased with Mara's growing influence. 6 weeks after the wedding, Reverend Huxley appeared at the ranch unannounced, his narrow face set in familiar lines of disapproval. Mara was in the garden with the twins when he arrived, teaching them about companion planting and why marigolds helped protect tomatoes from pests. She felt him before she saw him, that prickling awareness of being watched with hostile intent. Reverend, she said, straightening and brushing dirt from her hands. This is unexpected. Mrs. Rowan, he said her married name like it pained him. I've come to discuss a matter of some delicacy. Girls, go find your father. He's in the barn. June and Lily exchanged glances, clearly reluctant to leave, but they obeyed. Only after they disappeared did Mara turn her full attention to Huxley. Say what you came to say. Very well. It has come to my attention that you've been practicing medicine without proper training or certification. That you're dispensing herbs and remedies to vulnerable women, making claims about healing that border on witchcraft. Mara felt ice slide down her spine. Witchcraft. The same accusation that had gotten women killed not so long ago, the same word that still carried power to destroy. I make no claims about witchcraft. I use herbs my mother taught me about, remedies that have been passed down for generations. I help women who have nowhere else to turn. You help them defy God's will. If the Lord chooses not to bless a woman with children, who are you to interfere? If he sends pain as punishment for sin, what right have you to ease it? Is that what you truly believe? That every woman's suffering is divine punishment? Mara's voice was steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Because if so, you've got a cruel God. Mine is more merciful than that. Huxley's face darkened. You speak blasphemy. I speak truth, and I won't stop helping women just because you think suffering is holy. She took a step toward him and was gratified to see him step back. You had your chance to break me, Reverend, back in Ironwood when you let them drag me through the dirt. But I survived that. I survived worse than that, and I'm not the frightened widow anymore who thought she deserved her punishment. I'm a wife, a mother, and a healer. And I'll be damned if I let you or anyone else tell me I'm wrong for using my gifts to ease suffering. You'll regret this defiance, Huxley said, his voice cold. Mark my words, Mrs. Rowan. Pride comes before a fall. Then I'll fall standing up. He left in a cloud of dust and righteous fury, and Mara stood watching him go, her hands shaking with reaction. Coulter appeared beside her, having apparently watched the confrontation from the barn. What did he want? He asked. To put me in my place, to remind me that I'm supposed to be small and silent and obedient. She looked at her husband, saw the concern in his eyes. He's going to make trouble, Coulter. I can feel it. Let him try. We'll handle it together. But Mara knew it wouldn't be that simple. Men like Huxley didn't give up when one threat failed. They escalated. The trouble came 2 weeks later in the form of an official letter from the Territorial Medical Board. Someone, almost certainly Huxley, had filed a complaint alleging that Mara was practicing medicine without a license, endangering patients with unproven remedies, and making false claims about her abilities. Mara read the letter 3 times, her stomach sinking further with each pass. There would be a hearing in Helena, the letter said. She was required to appear and defend her practices or cease all medical activities immediately. They can't do this, Coulter said, reading over her shoulder. You're not claiming to be a doctor. You're just helping people. They can, and they are. Mara set the letter down carefully, like it might bite. Huxley must have called in favors, made me sound dangerous, and now I have to prove I'm not. Then we prove it. We go to Helena. We bring testimony from every woman you've helped. We show them exactly what you do and why it matters. That's asking a lot. Some of those women, their husbands don't know they've been seeing me. Their families would be scandalized if it came out. Then we ask, and we let them decide. But Mara, you can't just give up, not after everything you've built. He was right, of course. But the thought of standing before a board of male doctors and officials, defending her knowledge against their diplomas and degrees, made her want to crawl into bed and never emerge. Still, she'd faced worse. She'd faced Ironwood and survived. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Mara wrote down everything she could remember about her remedies, the ingredients, the applications, the results she'd seen. Mrs. Chen and Margaret Hendricks helped organize testimony from the women Mara had helped, carefully documenting each case while protecting the women's privacy as much as possible. The Morrisons offered to accompany them to Helena, lending their respectable presence and financial support to the cause. Even Tom Hendricks, gruff and practical, showed up to offer a letter vouching for Mara's character and the help she'd given his wife. Never seen Margaret so healthy, he wrote in his blocky handwriting. Whatever Mrs. Rowan's doing, it's working. Would be a shame to stop it over bureaucratic nonsense. The day before they were due to leave for Helena, Mara was packing her medicines and documents when she heard raised voices from the yard. She looked out to see Dalton Pruitt climbing down from his wagon, his face red and angry. Her heart sank. She hadn't seen Samuel's brother since the town meeting, had hoped he'd moved on from his hatred. Apparently not. Coulter was already striding toward him, the twins safely inside with Mrs. Chen, who'd come to help with preparations. Mara hurried out to join them. No right to keep practicing your poison, Dalton was saying. My brother's blood is on your hands, and now you're trying to... Enough, Coulter said, his voice dangerously quiet. Get off my property. Not until I've had my say. That woman killed Samuel as sure as if she'd shot him, and now she's spreading her curse to other families. Samuel died in an accident, Mara said, stepping forward despite Coulter's warning glance. A horrible, tragic accident that had nothing to do with me. And I'm sorry, Dalton. I'm sorry you lost your brother. I lost my husband. We both suffered, but blaming me won't bring him back. You made him weak, made him careless. He was so busy worrying about you and your failures that he stopped paying attention. Is that what you really think? Or is it just easier than admitting that sometimes terrible things happen and there's no one to blame? Mara felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. Samuel loved me. I loved him. And yes, we couldn't have children, but that doesn't mean our marriage was a failure. It doesn't mean I killed him. It just means we were unlucky. Unlucky? Dalton's laugh was bitter. That's one word for it. What do you want from me, Dalton? What would make this right in your eyes? He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw beneath the anger to the grief he'd been carrying for 2 years. The loss of his only brother, the loneliness, the need to make sense of senseless tragedy. I want him back, Dalton said finally, his voice breaking. I want my brother back, and I can't have him, so I want someone to pay for it. I've been paying for it, Mara said softly. Every day since he died. Every time someone looks at me and sees failure instead of a person. Every time I wonder if things could have been different. She took a shaky breath. But I'm done now. I'm done letting grief and guilt rule my life. And I think you should be done too. Dalton's face crumpled. For a moment, Mara thought he might actually break down, might let go of the rage that had been eating him alive. But then he straightened, set his jaw, climbed back into his wagon. You're going to fail, he said. That hearing in Helena, you'll lose, and everyone will see you for what you really are. Maybe, Mara said, or maybe I'll surprise you. He left without another word, and Mara sagged against Coulter, suddenly exhausted. That went better than I expected, Coulter said wryly. He's hurting. Probably has been since Samuel died and no one helped him process it. That's not your responsibility. I know, but I understand it. She looked up at him. Promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if I die before you, God forbid, promise you won't let bitterness poison you. Promise you'll grieve, but then keep living, keep loving. Don't let the grief win. Coulter pulled her close, his arms solid and sure around her. Nothing's going to happen to you. And we're both going to live to be old and gray and so cantankerous our grandchildren will tell stories about us. Grandchildren, Mara whispered, testing the word. I like the sound of that. The journey to Helena took 3 days by wagon, the Morrisons riding alongside them while Mrs. Chen stayed behind with the twins. Mara spent the travel time rehearsing her testimony, trying to anticipate the board's questions, fighting down panic every time she thought about actually standing before them. Helena was bigger than any town Mara had ever seen, with proper streets and gas lamps and buildings that stretched 3 stories high. The territorial offices were housed in an impressive stone structure that made Mara feel very small as they climbed the steps. The hearing room was formal and intimidating. A long table at one end where 5 men sat in official-looking suits, rows of benches for observers, windows that let in pale northern light. Mara sat at a small table facing the board, Coulter beside her, the Morrisons just behind for support. The chairman was a stern-faced man named Dr. Harrison, who'd apparently practiced medicine for 30 years and had strong opinions about proper credentials. He looked at Mara like she was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. Mrs. Rowan, he began, you stand accused of practicing medicine without proper training or certification, of dispensing remedies without understanding their effects, and of making false claims about your healing abilities. How do you plead? Not guilty, Mara said, keeping her voice steady. I've never claimed to be a doctor. I use traditional remedies passed down through my family, and I help women who have nowhere else to turn. Traditional remedies, Dr. Harrison repeated with obvious disdain. Folk medicine, superstition dressed up as healing. With respect, sir, folk medicine has been keeping people alive for thousands of years. Long before medical schools existed, women were helping each other through childbirth and illness and injury using the knowledge of plants and herbs. That knowledge doesn't become invalid just because it wasn't learned from a textbook. One of the other board members, a younger man with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Can you give us an example of your methods?" Mara took a breath, launched into a careful explanation of how she'd treated a woman's chronic pain using willow bark and feverfew, how she'd stopped premature labor with bed rest and specific teas, how she'd helped a new mother whose milk wouldn't come in. She spoke clearly and specifically, showing that she understood not just what to do but why, demonstrating the depth of knowledge her mother had passed down. The board members listened, some skeptically, some with growing interest. When she finished, Dr. Harrison sat back with a frown. "Impressive," he admitted grudgingly, "but still unlicensed, still unregulated. What's to stop you from making a mistake, from accidentally poisoning someone with the wrong dose or the wrong plant?" "Training," Mara said. "Years of it, learning from my mother who learned from hers. And caution, I never give a remedy I haven't thoroughly tested, never treat a condition I don't understand. When someone needs surgery or serious medical intervention, I send them to a proper doctor. I know my limitations. Yet you accept payment for these services." "I accept what people can afford to give, which is usually eggs or vegetables. I'm not getting rich off this. I'm helping my community." The questioning continued for over an hour, the board members probing and challenging every aspect of her practice. Mara answered as best she could, trying to stay calm, even when they were clearly trying to trip her up. Finally, Dr. Harrison called for a recess. The board would deliberate and render a decision within the hour. Mara fled to the hallway, her hands shaking, her stomach churning. Coulter followed, pulling her into his arms. "You did well," he murmured against her hair. "You were brilliant." "I don't think it was enough. Did you see their faces?" "I saw men who were impressed despite themselves. You gave them facts, evidence, logic. They can't ignore that." But when the board reconvened, Dr. Harrison's expression was grave. "Mrs. Rowan, this board has reached a decision. While we acknowledge your obvious knowledge and your stated commitment to helping people, we cannot in good conscience allow unlicensed medical practice to continue unchecked." Mara's heart plummeted. "However," Harrison continued, and something in his tone made her look up, "we also recognize that in remote areas, traditional healers serve a vital function. Therefore, we are prepared to offer a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" Coulter asked. "Mrs. Rowan will submit to examination by a licensed physician who will evaluate her knowledge and methods. If she passes this evaluation to his satisfaction, we will issue her a limited license to practice traditional medicine in her region, with the understanding that she will refer serious cases to qualified doctors and submit to periodic reviews of her work." Mara couldn't breathe. You're going to let me keep practicing? Under supervision, with restrictions, and only after you prove your competency." "But yes." Harrison's stern face softened slightly. "We've reviewed the testimonials your supporters provided. 12 women, Mrs. Rowan. 12 women who say you quite literally saved their lives or the lives of their children. That's not nothing. We'd be fools to dismiss it entirely." The younger board member who'd shown interest earlier spoke up. "I'd like to volunteer to conduct the evaluation, if Mrs. Rowan is amenable. I practice in Silver Creek, which is relatively close to her ranch. We could arrange a series of visits where I observe her work and test her knowledge." "Dr. Samuel Winters," Harrison said by way of introduction. "One of our finest young physicians, trained in both traditional and modern methods." Dr. Winters smiled at Mara. "My grandmother was a midwife and herbalist. I learned as much from her as I did from medical school. I think we'll get along just fine." Mara felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she was smiling, actually smiling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Thank you so much." "Don't thank us yet. You still have to pass the evaluation, Doctor. Winters will be thorough." "I wouldn't want it any other way." The trip back to the ranch felt like floating, like Mara's feet never quite touched the ground. She'd done it. She'd stood before the board and defended herself and won. Not everything she'd hoped for, but enough. More than enough. When they arrived home, the twins came running out of the house with Mrs. Chen huffing behind them, and Mara scooped them both up despite their size, spinning them around until they were all dizzy and laughing. "You won?" June asked. We won, Mara confirmed. Not just me, all of us. Every woman who stood up and told her story, every person who believed I was worth fighting for. We won together. That night, after the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, Mara stood in her workroom looking at the shelves Coulter had built, at the jars of herbs and the books of knowledge and the future stretching out before her like an open road. "What are you thinking?" Coulter asked from the doorway. "That I'm happy, truly, deeply happy, and I keep waiting for something to ruin it, for the other shoe to drop. Maybe there is no other shoe. Maybe this is just life now, good and full, and yours to live." "Ours," she corrected, turning to face him. "Ours to live." He crossed the room, took her hands in his. "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For saving me. I was drowning before you came, going through the motions but not really living. You brought this house back to life, brought me back to life. You saved me first, literally pulled me out of the dirt and gave me a reason to keep going. Then I guess we're even." "I guess we are." They stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, hearts aligned, two broken people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment and decided to be whole together. The months that followed were the happiest of Mara's life. Dr. Winters proved to be everything he'd promised, thorough but fair, testing her knowledge rigorously but never dismissively. He visited monthly, observing her work, asking questions, challenging her assumptions in ways that made her better at what she did. By harvest time, he'd submitted his final evaluation to the board, recommending without reservation that Mara receive her limited license. The official paper arrived on a crisp October morning, stamped and sealed and making her legal in the eyes of the territorial government. "Mrs. Mara Rowan, licensed traditional healer," she read aloud, tracing the words with her finger. "It's real." "It always was," Coulter said. "This just makes it official." The twins insisted on framing the license and hanging it in Mara's workroom, treating it with the reverence usually reserved for religious texts. And maybe it was a kind of scripture, Mara thought, proof that women's knowledge mattered, that traditional healing had value, that you didn't need a medical degree to make a difference in people's lives. Word spread quickly through the valley and beyond. More women came seeking help, traveling from farther away now that Mara had official sanction for her work. She treated them all with the same care and attention, building a reputation that reached even Ironwood. When Reverend Huxley showed up at her door 6 months after the hearing, Mara almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, diminished somehow, his sharp edges worn smooth by something that looked like defeat. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Mara considered sending him away, but curiosity won out. She invited him to sit on the porch while she remained standing, unwilling to give up the high ground. "Say what you came to say, Reverend." "I came to apologize." The words seemed to pain him. "For what I did to you in Ironwood, for the town meeting, for filing that complaint with the medical board. I was wrong." Mara blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Wrong?" "My sister took ill last month, terrible fever, pain that wouldn't stop. The doctor in Ironwood tried everything and nothing worked. She was dying." He paused, his hands twisting the brim of his hat. "My wife insisted we bring her to you. I refused at first, out of pride and stubbornness, but finally I agreed because what did we have to lose?" "And?" Mara asked, though she already knew the answer. "And you saved her. You identified the problem within minutes, gave her some foul-smelling tea, and within 2 days she was on the mend. The doctor couldn't explain it, called it a miracle." Huxley looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "But I know the truth. It wasn't a miracle. It was you." "It was feverfew and willow bark," Mara said quietly. "For the inflammation and rest. Nothing miraculous about it." "Maybe not, but it worked when nothing else did. And it made me realize that I've been wrong about a great many things." He stood, holding out his hand. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Mara looked at his outstretched hand, thought about all the pain he'd caused, all the judgment and cruelty. Part of her wanted to refuse, to send him away without the absolution he sought. But she was tired of carrying anger, tired of letting the past dictate her future. She took his hand. Apology accepted, Reverend, and I hope your sister continues to improve. Relief flooded his face. Thank you. And if there's ever anything I can do, there is one thing. Stop telling women their suffering is God's punishment. Stop making them feel like failures for things beyond their control. Start offering compassion instead of condemnation. Huxley was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll try. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. As winter settled over the valley, Mara found herself pregnant. The realization came slowly, a creeping awareness of changes in her body that she'd stopped expecting years ago. She didn't tell anyone at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it, afraid of the crushing disappointment if it didn't last. But the weeks passed and the pregnancy held, and finally she couldn't keep it secret anymore. She told Coulter one night after the twins were asleep, her hands shaking as she placed his palm against her still flat stomach. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. As sure as I can be. It's early still and anything could happen, but yes, I'm pregnant. He pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt wetness against her neck that might have been tears. I thought you said you couldn't, he whispered. I thought I couldn't, but bodies are strange and unpredictable, and sometimes miracles happen when you're not looking for them. She pulled back to look at him. Are you happy? Happy? Mara, I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely think straight. But yes, I'm happy. They told the twins the next morning, unsure how they'd react, but June and Lily were ecstatic, immediately planning what they'd teach the baby and arguing over names and making grand pronouncements about being the best big sisters in the history of the world. The pregnancy was difficult. Mara's body, unused to the demands being placed on it, protested violently. She was sick for months, exhausted and aching and struggling to keep up with the work of the ranch and her healing practice. But she'd learned enough over the years to manage her symptoms, and Dr. Winters checked on her regularly, monitoring her progress with careful attention. You're doing remarkably well, he told her during a visit in her 6th month. Given your age and history, I was worried. But you're strong, Mrs. Rowan, stronger than most. I've had a lot of practice at surviving, Mara said wryly. The baby came early, on a frozen February morning when the world outside was white and silent with snow. The labor was long and brutal, and there were moments when Mara was certain she wouldn't survive it. But Coulter held her hand and the twins sang songs from the next room, and Dr. Winters coached her through each contraction with calm competence. And finally, a thin wail split the air. It's a boy, Dr. Winters announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Mara's chest. Small, but healthy. Congratulations. Mara looked down at her son, and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. This impossible child, this gift she'd never expected, this tiny person who'd chosen to grow inside her despite all the years of failure and loss. Hello, she whispered, tracing his perfect features with a trembling finger. Hello, Samuel. Named for her first husband, for the man who'd loved her when no one else would, for the life she'd thought was over but had only been dormant, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Coulter kissed her forehead, his own eyes wet with tears. He's perfect. He is. Mara looked up at him, at the man who'd given her everything. We're perfect. The twins burst into the room moments later, despite Dr. Winters' protests, climbing carefully onto the bed to peer at their new brother with awe and wonder. He's so tiny, June breathed. We were that tiny once, Lily said importantly. Mama, can we hold him? Soon. Let's let him rest first. They settled on either side of Mara, the 4 of them, soon to be 5 with Coulter, arranged on the bed like puzzle pieces that had finally found where they belonged. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white silence. But inside the Rowan ranch house, there was warmth and light and love, and the absolute certainty that despite everything that had tried to break them, they'd survived. They'd more than survived. They'd thrived. Spring came late that year, the snow lingering well into March before finally surrendering to the sun. By the time the first green shoots appeared in Mara's garden, Samuel was already trying to hold his head up, already showing signs of the stubborn determination that ran in both sides of his family. Mara stood at her workroom window one morning, the baby sleeping in a sling against her chest, watching Coulter teach the twins how to plant seed potatoes. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying clearly in the cool air, and Mara felt her heart expand with a happiness so complete it was almost painful. She thought about the woman she'd been in Ironwood, broken and hopeless, certain her life was over. Thought about being dragged through the dirt, while a town watched and judged and found her wanting. Thought about two small girls who'd looked at her and seen not a failure, but a mother. And she thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd learned, how completely wrong everyone had been about who she was and what she was capable of. Behind her, footsteps on the porch announced a visitor. She turned to find Margaret Hendricks climbing down from her wagon, a basket over her arm. "Brought you some fresh eggs," Margaret called, "and I've got a favor to ask." "Come in, coffee's hot." They sat at the kitchen table, the baby passed between them while they drank their coffee and discussed Margaret's favor. Her youngest daughter was newly married and struggling with the transition. Could Mara maybe talk to her, share some wisdom? "I'm not sure I'm the right person," Mara said. "My first marriage was complicated." "Which is exactly why you're the right person. You understand struggle. You understand that sometimes things don't work out the way you planned, but you survive anyway." Margaret smiled, bouncing Samuel gently. "You're proof that there's life after loss. That's a powerful thing." After Margaret left, Mara returned to her window, watching her family work in the garden. The twins had moved on from potatoes to some game that involved a lot of running and shrieking. Coulter watched them with that small smile he got when he thought no one was looking, the one that said he was content, that this life they'd built together was enough. More than enough. Everything. Mara pressed a kiss to Samuel's downy head and whispered a promise she intended to keep. "You're going to grow up knowing you're loved, knowing you're wanted, knowing that family isn't about blood or perfection or meeting someone else's expectations. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The baby made a small sound, not quite a coo, but close enough. Mara smiled, cradled him closer, and turned away from the window to begin preparing lunch. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The snow melted. The world turned green. And in the house that had once been haunted by grief and loss, a family lived and laughed and loved with the fierce certainty of people who'd survived the worst and come out stronger. Mara Rowan, once called barren, once called cursed, once dragged through the dirt by people who should have known better, stood in her kitchen with her baby son in her arms and her daughter's laughter floating through the window and her husband's love wrapped around her like armor. And she didn't wonder if she belonged. She knew. She always had. She always would. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd fought for and earned and claimed as her own. And it was beautiful.